The system that we use to elect presidents in the United States is garbage. It's a problem that's so huge it affects nearly everything, but people just accept it as the way things have to be. They accept that it favors one party and one race, they accept that somebody in a small state gets a hell of a lot more of a vote than they do, and they accept that the candidate that gets the most votes may not even become president. It's like we slipped into some bizarre parallel universe where sandwiches have meat on the outside, people keep tigers as pets, and Berenstain Bears is spelled with an A. This is The Idle State. I'm Nick Wright. Let's talk about the Electoral College. What is it? Why do we still have it? And what can we do to fix it? A lot has happened this year. The coronavirus pandemic has changed the world, and not just in a motivational poster / Eric Clapton song kind of way, but in ways we may not realize for years to come. At some point we'll arrive at a new normal, and that new normal will include new problems. But it will also have some that we've been dealing with for a long time, and one of those problems, one that arguably made the pandemic much worse, is the United States Electoral College. Like a regular college, it's full of people who got there because their families are rich, but we'll be paying for it for the rest of our lives.
Donald Trump is the President of the United States. Donald J. Trump, the son of a Queens millionaire, defied all conventional wisdom and all expectations.
Yes, it was an historic moment. For far too long, the sons of Queens millionaires had been the great underclass of this country, constantly limited by the burden of their daddy's money. So let's take a look at the institution that made this inspiring lateral move to power tale possible, the Electoral College. When the founders of the United States of America were designing the government, they had no real blueprint for how electing a president would actually work. Some, including Alexander Hamilton, worried that a direct popular vote might lead to a disaster.
The choice of several to form an intermediate body of electors will be much less apt to convulse the community with any extraordinary or violent movements than the choice of one who is himself to be the final object of the public wishes. This detached and divided situation will expose them much less to heats and ferments.
Power to the people, but not too much power, because the people are dipshits. Hamilton later made it clear that he was worried about the military despotism of a victorious demagogue, the kind of person who might rise to power by blaming everything wrong with the country on groups of people who are already hated and marginalized, and then use his position to wage war, leaving the real power to elect a president to a group of trusted, intelligent, capable elites in the Electoral College would surely, prevent that from happening.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
When talk turned to Haiti and countries in Africa at that meeting, he apparently said, this is a quote, "Why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here?"
Build that wall, build that wall, build that wall, build that wall.
Hamilton was obviously a brilliant man, but this wouldn't be his last major miss. When all this was being decided, there were no political parties in the United States, and it was expected that electors would simply vote their conscience. Instead, electors are now bound by state laws to represent their party leaders, and historically, they have served an almost entirely meaningless role. In all but the rarest of occasions, they've been a rubber stamp for the popular vote winner of their states. And in 2016, they elected as president a man who built his political career on questioning the authenticity of the nation's first black president, and started off his campaign with this.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Good show, electors. Way to really protect our nation from dangerous demagogues there. It's like if I just blindly approved whatever my cats voted for dinner. Butter, houseplant leaves, and your own puke? Sure, that sounds like a fine plan for your long-term health. Bone up the teeth, my fine feline friends. Bone up the teeth. Okay, so the Electoral College simply doesn't work as a last-ditch defense against terrible presidents. But it's still representative of the people, so if the people vote for the right candidate, that candidate should win, right? Well, in many cases, they don't. In fact, it's happened 5 times since the country was founded. John Quincy Adams, Rutherford B. Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump all became president even though they got fewer votes than their opponents. And the problem is getting worse as the Electoral College becomes increasingly less representative of the demographics of the country. This inequality is actually built into the system. One of the driving factors behind the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 was a push for more electoral college power in the South. By counting their non-voting populations of enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxing purposes, the 3/5 Compromise inflated the electoral college power of southern states, and consequently for 32 of the first 36 years of our country, our president was a slaveholding Virginian. In modern times, the way electoral college votes are apportioned guarantees that smaller, whiter states have a much bigger say per person than larger and more diverse ones. Congratulations, America! We're burning the racism candle at both ends! Thankfully, it has not gone unnoticed.
We need to end the Electoral College and have a popular vote.
Twice in my young lifetime, I've seen the American people overruled by the Electoral College. It's time for that to go because it's undemocratic.
We can have national voting, and that means get rid of the Electoral College and everybody.
You'll recall that in 2012, then citizen Trump tweeted this: "The Electoral College is a disaster for democracy."
That's right, even Donald John Trump made the time to speak out against the Electoral College, despite his busy schedule of selling shitty steaks, defrauding police charities, and ripping off students at his fake university. But it wasn't long before the Republicans wised up and changed their tune.
Trump now defends the Electoral College, a system he once slammed as unfair.
I never appreciated it until now, how genius it was, what they had in mind.
I do think it's a disservice to say it should be abolished without acknowledging that it actually has a purpose.
Right, exactly.
So sure, you can argue that we need to change the system that's made us the greatest nation on earth and the envy of the world for the last 200 plus years, or you can recognize that majority rule is the last thing we want.
That is a pretty stark turnaround. Republicans went from the Electoral College is a disaster for democracy to end of Electoral College is end of America. It's like the Electoral College has a tape of all of them getting pissed on in a Moscow hotel. Now, if you were thinking that it's awfully curious how only Republicans are rushing to defend this great bastion of American democracy, you'd be right. Republicans support the Electoral College because, due to the way Electoral College votes are distributed, it helps them win. Theoretically, a state's power in the Electoral College should be representative, more or less, of the population of the state. But when you're working with population scales in the tens of millions, that's no longer the case. Much of the rhetoric around the Electoral College focuses on the disparity between the voting power of small, overwhelmingly white states like Wyoming compared to large, diverse ones like California. And it's true, 193,000 voters in Wyoming have the same power in the Electoral College as 719,000 Californians. That's nearly 4 times the power per person to elect a president. But these differences aren't only evident at the extremes. When I moved from South Carolina to Georgia, my own vote became worth a lot less. All I did was cross a river. It's like my wagon tipped over while floating and I lost 10% of my voting power. So what is the formula that makes the Electoral College so unequal in the first place? The real source of the problem here, like many of the problems with the country, is the United States Senate. The formula for determining a state's electoral college votes is typically the sum of the state's representatives in the U.S. House, which is more or less determined by population, plus their number of U.S. senators, which is definitely not. The number of senators per state is 2, no matter how big or small the state. This leads today to a situation where 40 million people who happen to live in one state are represented by 2 senators, where 40 million people who live in the smallest 23 states combined control 46. That's absurd. It's like organizing a music festival and giving Beyoncé the same size stage as my high school emo band, Crash and the Roadside Memorials. To be fair, our cover of Crazy in Love would have been a banger. So how can we improve the Electoral College? Well, aside from the obscene inequality that elevates Wyoming resident Jim John McNothing Mountains to become the most influential voter in this nation, there's also the fact that in many cases, nearly half of the state's voters are disenfranchised by the college due to the winner-take-all system.
Let's say you're a voter in California, a state with 55 electoral votes. If your candidate wins in California, they get all 55 of the state's electoral votes. If your candidate loses, they get none.
Why? We're voting to elect the President of the United States, not the President of South Dakota, who, by the way, is Jim John McNothing Mountains. That guy really gets around. We tend to think of states as blue or red, but there are a lot of Republicans in California and a lot of Democrats in Texas. Many state contests are decided by margins of 10 points or less, meaning that nearly half of their voters are disenfranchised. People realize this, and often they simply don't bother voting in states where they feel like their votes won't count. And why would they? It's like arguing for the healthy restaurant when all your friends want to go to Slappy Jack's house of fried Kool-Aid and meat sweats. You might be right, but you're gonna lose. Some other ways to distribute Electoral College votes have been proposed, and one of those systems is in place today. Maine and Nebraska award one electoral vote to the winner of each of their U.S. congressional districts and allocate the 2 remaining votes to whoever wins the state's popular vote. This is a marginally fairer system, but what is a congressional district anyway? Do you know what congressional district you're in? Well, I do, and I have lots in common with the other members of this gerrymandered district awkwardly cupping Atlanta's balls. I'm certain the same can be said of the corkscrew penis breadcrumb eaters who live in the Duck, Ohio's 4th district. And I think the residents of Louisiana's 2nd district all agree on their desire to deeply penetrate the 6th. Okay, so congressional districts are clearly bullshit, but what about a straight-up proportional allocation of electoral votes based on the state's popular vote? Say if your state has 10 electoral votes and the candidates get 60 and 40%, they get 6 and 4 electoral college votes respectively. We're so close here! This kind of system would get us much closer to the overall national popular vote totals, and it would even allow for third-party candidates to gain some real recognition, if they could manage to stop smoking pot and sun-gazing long enough to campaign. In fact, under these rules in 2016, third-party candidates would have secured enough Electoral College votes to keep Donald Trump from reaching 270, leaving the election of the president to the House of Representatives. You know, it feels like so long ago. Hey Cortana, who was the Speaker of the House in 2016? Tight. Alright, maybe that wouldn't have been the best idea. On top of making this hella swole broski a kingmaker, this approach does nothing to make sure that people living in different states have equal influence on the election. And if you're going to go to the trouble of making the Electoral College match the popular vote totals, why bother having it? Just have a straight-up national popular vote and be done with it. And we have actually tried that. There have been attempts to end the Electoral College via a constitutional amendment, but they've gone nowhere because it would require a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate, and there's no chance we can expect half of Republicans to vote away one of their best cheats. That's like asking Star Trek writers to give up the transporter. Oh sure, we know it kills our characters every time it disassembles their atoms and replaces them with a clone on the other side, but without it, we'd have to animate a shuttle. Okay, so we can't abolish the Electoral College without overwhelming majorities in both houses of Congress, and we certainly can't get the Senate to abolish itself and save us the trouble. Meanwhile, the best options we have for even just improving the Electoral College don't address the central issues that make it an unfair representation. We're screwed, right? American democracy is over. Nothing matters until after the revolution when we can fix all this. In the meantime, I'm just gonna go back to burping the word fart and buying whatever the fuck it is Wish is trying to sell me. But hang on, there might be one more way out of this.
Well, we turn now to the campaign for electoral reform. On Monday, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed legislation that recommits New York to the National Popular Vote Compact. Under the compact, states across the country have pledged to award their electoral votes to the presidential candidate who wins the nationwide popular vote. If enough states sign on, it would guarantee the presidency goes to the candidate who wins the most votes across the country. It would prevent scenarios like what happened in 2000 when Al Gore won the popular vote but still lost the election to George W. Bush.
Ah, look at the fresh-faced host of Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman. She has no idea what's about to happen to her. That's right, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement between 15 states and DC as of today that would allocate their combined votes to the winner, as you might imagine, of the national popular vote. The agreement isn't legally binding until there are enough states in the compact to reach 270 electoral votes, enough to secure the presidency for the popular vote winner. It's a genius workaround that eliminates the need for a constitutional amendment or attempting to abolish anything, and it represents states working together for a common goal in opposition to the stupidities of the federal government. So of course the states' rights conservatives are in full support, right?
Unfortunately, there is now a well-financed, below-the-radar effort to do away with the Electoral College. It is called National Popular Vote, or NPV, and it wants to do exactly what the founders rejected. Award the job of president to the person who gets the most votes nationally.
Oh no! We wouldn't want the candidate who gets more votes to win, would we? That would be madness! One frequent claim you may have heard on Facebook from your uncle who owns a Tucker Carlson bobblehead is that without the Electoral College, the presidential election would be completely up to New York City and Los Angeles. Of course, this is absurd because the combined population of these two major cities is only about 10% of the population of the United States, even when you include their multi-state metro areas. But why let a little thing like math stop you? Republicans also favor another form of this argument when they, with a straight face, suggest that a popular vote would lead to presidential contests being determined by only a handful of states. This is a particularly impressive form of willful ignorance when everybody knows that for the past several elections, the contest has been largely decided by two states, Ohio and Florida.
States critical to any modern presidential election, the battlegrounds of Ohio and Florida.
The key states of Ohio and Florida that could reshape the race for both parties.
Trump wins in Ohio and Florida. What does that mean?
In fact, in 2016, the general election campaigns dedicated 99% of their ad spending and 95% of their campaign visits to 14 battleground states, with well over half going to just 4, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. It doesn't sound like either party is really considering the feelings of the good people of Smoot, Wyoming when making their campaign promises, but they're writing off Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta too. Some Republicans, like Iowa U.S. Senator Joni Ernst, have even claimed that if we eliminate the Electoral College, rural states would be silenced. This is, of course, utter nonsense. By combining their votes with the rest of the country, voters in rural states could guarantee that their vote was worth exactly as much as someone in a big city. On top of that, they would be able to participate in democracy on a national level without worrying that their votes would be invalidated by whatever party was popular in their state. You know, conservatives are all about one person, one vote when it comes to imaginary voter fraud scenarios or whether or not your lunch meeting is somewhere too ethnic. But they certainly have a blind spot when it comes to the institutions that, by definition, give them an unfair advantage. In fact, Republicans have rushed to embrace and defend the Electoral College so much that some have even suggested electoral colleges be established at a state level for governor's races. Yes, surely it's past time the fine people of Butts County, Georgia were given their fair share of 4 times the influence of their Fulton County lessers. And that does present a challenge to getting the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact into law. At the time of this video, the compact has been officially enacted by 15 states and the District of Columbia, bringing their Electoral College total to 196 votes. That's still a long way off from 270, but momentum is building. We could see the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact become a reality if as few as 5 more states sign on. But as you might have noticed by this graphic, so far the only states to officially enter the compact have been reliably blue. To make it to 270, we'll need to bring in the remaining blue states and then some, and that's where you and I come in. Legislation is currently pending in several states, and time is running out on these bills, so it's important to act quickly and make your voice heard. Now, if you're like me, you can go to the Wikipedia page and see what bill is active in your state, and then email your state representative directly. You know, difficult and complicated nerd shit. But the easiest way to do this is by using a tool like ResistBot, which identifies your local, state, and national representatives and allows you to blast a message supporting the adoption of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact to all of them. I've even included a sample script in the description box below that you can simply cut and paste. Now, this is of course a state issue, and therefore your representatives in Washington, D.C. won't have much control over whether your state adopts the compact. But trust me, it won't be the worst message anybody's ever left.
52-year-old Jan Meister, who was apparently watching Fox News and may have been drunk, got mad, Googled Adam Schiff's office number, and left a vulgar voicemail, expletive after expletive, including the phrase, "I'll blow your effing brains out."
The Electoral College is just one major way in which America is failing to accurately represent the will of its citizens. The Economist Intelligence Unit has characterized the U.S. as a flawed democracy for the past 3 years due to the ongoing erosion of trust in our government that has accelerated rapidly under the Trump administration. But Trump is merely a perverse, pus-engorged symptom of a larger disease that has been progressing since our nation's inception. It's time to fix our broken democracy in the United States of America, and with the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, we might actually be able to do it from the top down. Thanks for watching The Idle State. Because this is my first episode, I would really appreciate it if you give it a like, as it really helps me out and tells YouTube that this is worth watching. I have a ton of new episodes planned, covering caffeine, clowns, capitalism, and other things that don't even start with a C, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. If this video made you laugh or you learned something new, please share it with your friends. Even one share makes a huge difference for me, especially now. And let me know what you think about the show or about the Electoral College in the comments below, even if you just want to give me hell about it.